On April 22nd, 2026, Pakistan made history. Two names were announced to the world. And with those two names, a nation of 230 million people officially entered the era of human spaceflight for the very first time. Khurram Daud and Muhammad Zishan Ali are now the most talked about names in Pakistan. They are the two astronaut candidates selected by the China Manned Space Agency and Pakistan's Space and Upper Atmosphere Research Commission, known as SUPARCO, to train for a mission to China's Tiangong Space Station. One of them, after completing advanced training at the Astronaut Center of China, will be chosen for the actual flight. When that flight happens, scheduled for late 2026, that individual will become not just Pakistan's first astronaut to reach Earth's orbit. They will become the first foreign national in the entire history of spaceflight to set foot inside the Tiangong Space Station. China has had its own space station fully operational since 2022, and in all that time, every single person who has ever entered it has been Chinese. Pakistan's astronaut will change that, and change it permanently. To fully understand what this moment means, you have to go back decades and understand where Pakistan's space story actually began. Most people are surprised to learn that Pakistan has one of the oldest space programs in the entire world. SUPARCO, the Space and Upper Atmosphere Research Commission, was established in 1961 in Karachi. It was founded under the guidance of Abdus Salam, a Pakistani physicist who would later become the first Pakistani and first Muslim scientist to win a Nobel Prize in physics. When SUPARCO was created, China's National Space Agency did not yet exist. India's space organization, ISRO, would not be founded for another 8 years. Pakistan was among the very first nations in Asia, and among the first in the entire developing world, to seriously pursue space science as a national priority. In 1962, just 1 year after SUPARCO's founding, Pakistan became the 10th nation on Earth to successfully launch a rocket into the upper atmosphere. The rocket was called Rehbar-1. It was a moment of genuine pioneering achievement, and it placed Pakistan alongside the United States and the Soviet Union as one of the first countries to actively explore the boundary between Earth's atmosphere and space. For a brief period in the early 1960s, Pakistan's space ambitions were not a fantasy. They were a real program with real hardware and real momentum, supported partly through collaboration with NASA and American scientific institutions. But then history intervened. The 1971 war with India reshaped Pakistani national priorities entirely. The government turned its attention and its resources toward the nuclear program, which it considered a more urgent national security requirement. Engineers who had been working in aerospace were transferred to the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission. American funding for upper atmosphere research dried up. SUPARCO, which had started with such promise, entered a long period of decline, limited funding, shrinking ambitions, and a painful awareness that while Pakistan was standing still, its neighbors and rivals were sprinting forward. India launched its first satellite in 1975. China began building serious rocket capabilities through the 1970s and 1980s. The Soviet Union and the United States were racing each other to the moon and beyond. And Pakistan, which had once been among the first 10 nations to touch space with its rockets, watched all of it from the sidelines. The loss of 2 orbital slots in 1993 and 1994, slots that Pakistan had reserved but could not use because it lacked the resources to deploy. Satellites in time was a particularly painful symbol of how far the program had fallen from its early promise. What eventually gave SUPARCO a second life was China. The relationship between Pakistan and China in space began building seriously in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Pakistan's first satellite, Badr-1, a communications satellite that SUPARCO had been developing for years, was launched from China in 1990 after negotiations with the United States to use American launch services fell through. That launch marked the beginning of a space partnership between the two countries that has deepened steadily with every passing decade. In 2012, SUPARCO and China's National Space Administration signed a formal roadmap for space collaboration. China launched Pakistan's Pakistan Remote Sensing Satellite PRSS-1 in 2018, giving Pakistan high-resolution Earth observation capability for the first time. 2 more Pakistani satellites, the PRSC-EO-1 Earth Observation Satellite and the HS-1 Hyperspectral Imaging Satellite, were launched on Chinese rockets in 2025. And then, in February 2025, came the agreement that would change everything. The Astronaut Cooperation Agreement was signed in Islamabad on February 28, 2025, at the Prime Minister's office. The signing ceremony was witnessed by Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Lin Xiqiang, the Deputy Director of the China Manned Space Engineering Office, and Mohammed Yusuf Khan, the Chairman of SUPARCO. Under the agreement, China committed to selecting and training Pakistani astronaut candidates and arranging for a Pakistani astronaut to fly to the Tiangong Space Station aboard a Shenzhou spacecraft. This was not a minor diplomatic gesture. It was the first time in history that China had agreed to select and train international astronauts for missions to its space station. Every previous mission to Tiangong had flown an entirely Chinese crew. Pakistan was being given something that no other country in the world had been offered yet. The selection process moved faster than most observers expected. By February 2026, SUPARCO announced it had completed the secondary phase of its astronaut candidate selection, shortlisting 2 individuals for advanced training in China. On April 22, 2026, the China Manned Space Agency made the official public announcement through state media. The 2 selected candidates, Kurram Daud and Mohammad Zishan Ali, had departed for China to begin their training at the Astronaut Center of China. The announcement was made the same week that China prepared to launch the Shenzhou 20 mission to Tiangong, carrying 3 Chinese astronauts to the station, underscoring just how active and operationally mature China's human spaceflight program has become in a remarkably short period of time. The planned mission itself is scheduled for October or November 2026. China's 2026 crewed space agenda includes 2 Shenzhou missions and 1 cargo resupply flight to sustain Tiangong operations. The Pakistani astronaut will join a Shenzhou crew during what is known as a handover period at the station, when the outgoing crew and incoming crew briefly overlap, temporarily allowing up to 6 people aboard the station at the same time. During this short-duration stay, the Pakistani payload specialist will conduct a program of scientific experiments specifically designed to advance Pakistan's national research priorities. SUPARCO officials have confirmed the experiments will cover material science, fluid physics, life and biological sciences, and biotechnology research. The findings will have intended applications in areas including climate resilience, food security, precision agriculture, disaster monitoring, and industrial innovation. Amir Gilani, who oversees human spaceflight cooperation at SUPARCO, told CNN that the experiments were still in the final selection process, but would have high scientific, industrial, and social impact. That phrase is significant. Pakistan is not sending an astronaut to space simply for national prestige, though the prestige dimension is undeniably real and important. The country is pursuing a specific scientific agenda with tangible intended benefits for its population. A developing nation with serious challenges in agriculture, climate vulnerability, and food security stands to gain real and practical knowledge from microgravity research that cannot be conducted in any Earth-based laboratory. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif responded to the announcement with unmistakable national pride. He called it a major step forward in Pakistan's deep space research capabilities and praised the strong and enduring friendship between Pakistan and China, describing China as Pakistan's most reliable friend and strategic partner. He said Pakistan was looking to increase cooperation with China in the fields of space technology, space satellites, and satellite internet. Amjad Ali, the deputy director of SUPARCO, described the development as a milestone for the South Asian nation, whose government is taking a renewed and serious interest in a space program that is more than 60 years old, but is only now reaching its most ambitious phase. The geopolitical dimension of this mission cannot be separated from its scientific and symbolic dimensions. Pakistan's deep collaboration with China in space is a direct extension of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which has brought tens of billions of dollars of Chinese investment in infrastructure into Pakistan over the past decade. It also reflects the broader global competition between 2 distinct visions for how the international community accesses space. On one side is the American LAID model, centered on NASA, commercial partners like SpaceX, and the International Space Station, which has historically excluded China and therefore the partner nations that choose to align with China's space program. On the other side is China's emerging model centered on Tiangong and the Shenzhou program, which is now actively reaching out to nations across the developing world and global south to build a parallel international spaceflight community. Bleddyn Bowen, an associate professor in astropolitics at Durham University in the United Kingdom, described the agreement in terms that go beyond the bilateral relationship between China and Pakistan. He said the agreement fits into China's wider Belt and Road Initiative and the larger message China deploys around its role as a supplier of high technology capabilities for the developing world. He said many smaller or less wealthy nations want to participate in space programs, and China's offer to Pakistan is a high-level symbolic demonstration that China can be that platform and bigger partner for smaller space powers. The message to the global south is explicit. You do not need access to NASA or SpaceX or the American-led international space infrastructure to reach orbit. China can take you there. Quentin Parker, an astrophysicist and professor at the University of Hong Kong who has followed China's space program closely, emphasized the broader significance of internationalizing Tiangong. He described Pakistan's inclusion as a significant step in the internationalization of the Chinese space station and said that when you internationalize things properly, you build something greater than the sum of the parts. Those words carry real meaning in the context of space exploration, where the International Space Station was built on exactly that philosophy of international partnership and prove that collaborative human spaceflight produces scientific results that no single nation could achieve on its own. For Pakistan, the mission represents something that goes deeper than any single scientific experiment or political milestone. It represents a reckoning with decades of deferred ambition. SUPARCO was founded in 1961 with the dream of making Pakistan a space power. That dream was deferred for 50 years by wars, economic crises, political instability, and national security priorities that crowded out everything else. Now, at last, a Pakistani will leave Earth's surface and see their country from orbit. A Pakistani will float in zero gravity inside a space station built by a civilization that began its own space journey later than Pakistan did, but never lost focus on where it wanted to go. A Pakistani will conduct experiments in the most extreme and controlled scientific environment ever created by human beings and bring the results back to a country that needs every scientific advantage it can find. Pakistan has officially entered the space race. What that entry means for Pakistan's future in space extends well beyond this single mission. SUPARCO's space program. 2040, the long-term national roadmap, envisions Pakistan having a thriving satellite sector within 15 years, with ambitions that include possibly sending rovers to the Moon and Mars. That vision would have sounded fanciful even 5 years ago. Today, with a Pakistani astronaut headed to China for training, it sounds like the beginning of a credible trajectory rather than an impossible dream. The trend at the grassroots level in Pakistan reflects this shift. Educators and student space organizations have reported a noticeable increase in young Pakistanis pursuing degrees in aeronautics, astronautics, and related science and engineering fields. When children in a country see someone who looks like them, speaks their language, and comes from their culture preparing to go to space, something changes. Careers that seemed impossibly distant become imaginable. Possibilities that seemed reserved for Americans or Russians or Chinese suddenly feel accessible. That shift in the imagination of an entire generation is perhaps the most lasting consequence of what Khurram Daud and Mohammad Zishan Ali are about to do. China's decision to make Pakistan the first foreign partner in its human spaceflight program also carries strategic weight that extends beyond Pakistan itself. By opening Tiangong to international astronauts, starting with a close ally in the developing world, China is signaling to dozens of other nations that its space program is a viable alternative to the American and European-led international spaceflight community. Nations across Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Latin America that have been building relationships with China through the Belt and Road Initiative are now watching what happens to Pakistan's astronaut with intense interest. If the mission succeeds, if a Pakistani payload specialist flies to Tiangong, conducts meaningful scientific experiments, and returns safely to Earth, it will demonstrate to every one of those nations that China can deliver on the promise of inclusive space participation. The applications from other countries to join future Tiangong missions will follow. The Tiangong Space Station itself is a remarkable achievement that most people in the Western world know relatively little about. It sits in low Earth orbit at an altitude of between 340 and 450 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. It has a pressurized volume of 340 cubic meters spread across 3 modules. The Tianhe core module launched in 2021, the Wentian laboratory module launched in July 2022, and the Mengtian laboratory module launched in October 2022. It orbits Earth roughly 16 times per day. Chinese taikonauts live and work aboard it continuously, following a daily schedule synchronized to China Standard Time, waking at 7 in the morning for daily conferences with mission control in Beijing before beginning their scientific work. China plans to expand Tiangong from 3 to 6 modules beginning in 2027, which will increase its capacity for both crew and scientific research significantly. When Pakistan's astronaut arrives at Tiangong later in 2026, they will be entering what is already one of the most sophisticated scientific laboratories in orbit, a station that China built entirely on its own after being excluded from the International Space Station program. Pakistan has officially entered the space race, and the 2 names that started it all, Khurram Daud and Mohammad Zishan Ali, are already preparing for a mission that their nation has been dreaming about for more than 60 years.